Imagine this. You're in a room full of people. They're all nodding, agreeing, laughing, clapping, and you feel it, that quiet pressure in your chest, because you don't agree. But you say nothing. Your heart beats faster. Your brain calculates the risk. Your mouth stays closed. Not because you're stupid, not because you don't have thoughts, but because something inside you whispers, "Don't stand out." Now here's the question no one asks. Why does being different feel like a threat? Why does disagreeing feel like danger? Why do you change your personality depending on who you're around? You don't even notice it anymore. You shape-shift. You adapt. You shrink. And the worst part? You call it being mature. You call it keeping the peace. You call it fitting in. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not afraid of being wrong. You're afraid of being rejected. And 2,400 years ago, a man chose rejection over conformity. He chose death over pretending. His name was Socrates. And if you understand why he did that, you'll understand why you're so afraid to be different. The psychological root of social pressure. Let's strip this down to something raw. You think you're weak because you care what people think. You're not. You're ancient. For most of human history, being rejected didn't mean awkward silence. It meant death. If your tribe didn't like you, if they thought you were strange, if you challenged the leader, you didn't get cancelled. You got cast out. And alone in the wild, you didn't survive. Your nervous system still remembers that. That tight feeling in your chest when someone disapproves. That heat in your face when you say something unpopular. That overthinking after you post something bold. That's not insecurity. That's your survival system activating. Modern rejection doesn't kill you physically, but your brain reacts as if it might. The same neural circuits that process physical pain light up when you feel excluded. Your brain literally interprets social rejection as injury. So when you hesitate to speak, when you soften your opinions, when you adjust your personality, you're not being fake. You're trying to survive. Now add social media to this. Likes, followers, comments, views, digital tribes, digital approval, digital exile. We've turned belonging into a public scoreboard. And every time you think about being different, your brain calculates, what will this cost me socially? Here's the core truth. You don't fear being different. You fear being excluded. And most people choose belonging over truth without even realizing it. But Socrates did something almost insane. He chose exclusion. And that decision changed history. Who Socrates was, let me take you back to ancient Athens. No microphones, no social media, no podcasts, just crowded streets, public squares, and conversations. In the middle of all that noise walked a strange-looking man who didn't dress impressively, didn't claim to be wise, didn't chase status. His name was Socrates, and he did something that made powerful people deeply uncomfortable. He asked questions, simple questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is virtue? At first, it sounded harmless. But then, something happened. When politicians said they were wise, he would gently question them until they contradicted themselves. When intellectuals claimed knowledge, he would ask one more question, and then another, and then another. And suddenly their confidence collapsed, not because he attacked them, but because he exposed that they didn't really know what they thought they knew. And people hate that. They hate the feeling of being exposed. They hate the feeling of looking foolish. They hate the person who holds up a mirror. Socrates didn't shout. He didn't preach. He didn't demand followers. He simply refused to pretend. And that was enough to make him dangerous. Over time, the city turned against him. They accused him of corrupting the youth, of questioning traditions, of disrespecting authority. But here's what they were really afraid of. He made people think, and thinking breaks control. Eventually, he was put on trial. The jury found him guilty. The punishment? Death. Now here's the part most people don't fully understand. He could have escaped. His friends arranged it. He had the chance. He could have run. Instead, he stayed. He chose to drink the poison. Why? Because escaping would mean betraying his principles. It would mean admitting that survival mattered more than truth. And for him, living dishonestly was worse than dying honestly. Think about that. Most people won't risk awkwardness to stay true to themselves. He risked everything. He wasn't killed for being wrong. He was killed for making others question themselves. And if that level of integrity makes you uncomfortable, good. Because now we need to turn the mirror toward you. The mirror, how you silence yourself. Now let's bring this back to you. Not ancient Athens. Not a courtroom. Your life. When was the last time you laughed at something you didn't find funny, just to avoid being that person? When did you stay quiet in a conversation because you knew your opinion would create tension? When did you pretend to like something just to fit into the group? Maybe you chose a safe career path because it sounded respectable, even though something inside you wanted something different. Maybe you downplay your intelligence so people don't feel threatened. Maybe you hide your beliefs around family. Maybe you change your personality depending on who you're with. Different version at school, different version at work, different version online. You call it adaptability. But sometimes it's fear. And here's the psychological cost most people never calculate. Every time you silence yourself to stay accepted, you train your brain. You teach it authenticity equals danger. Your nervous system starts linking self-expression with risk. So the next time you want to speak up, your body reacts before your logic does. Heart rate increases, palms sweat, mind overthinks, voice hesitates. Not because you don't know what to say, because your brain is protecting you from social pain. But long term, this protection becomes a prison. When you constantly adjust yourself for approval, something subtle happens. You start losing track of who you actually are. You begin to feel anxious for no clear reason. You feel resentful toward people you care about. You feel like an imposter in your own life, because deep down you know they don't fully know you. They only know the edited version, and the more you hide, the weaker you feel, not physically, internally. Because confidence doesn't come from approval, it comes from alignment, from knowing that what you think, what you say, and how you live are not in constant conflict. And if that conflict feels familiar to you, then what you're feeling isn't weakness. It's the tension between belonging and being real. And now we need to understand why being real feels so terrifying in the first place. Why being different feels so terrifying. Let's go deeper. Why does something as simple as disagreeing feel so intense? Why does standing alone in a room full of people feel almost physically painful? Because in many ways, it is. Modern neuroscience shows that social rejection activates the same brain regions involved in physical pain. Your brain doesn't clearly separate a broken bone from a broken sense of belonging. To your nervous system, exclusion equals threat. So when you consider being different, your body reacts before your logic does. Your mind says, it's just an opinion. Your nervous system says, this could cost you connection. And connection is survival currency. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Humans crave belonging more than they crave truth. Most people would rather be accepted and wrong than isolated and right. Why? Because belonging feels safe. Truth feels lonely. When you challenge the group, you're not just offering a different idea. You're disrupting the emotional comfort of everyone else. You're forcing them to question themselves, and that creates insecurity. So what do insecure people do? They defend, they mock, they label, they attack. Not always aggressively, sometimes subtly. Eye rolls, silence, exclusion, whispers. When you stand out, you threaten the group's illusion of normal. If you choose a different path, it makes others question why they didn't. If you speak boldly, it exposes their silence. If you refuse to conform, it reveals their fear. And people don't like mirrors, so they try to break them. That's why being different feels terrifying. It's not just about you. It's about what your difference represents. But here's the shift. Maybe the anxiety you feel isn't proof that you're wrong. Maybe it's proof that you're stepping outside the script. Maybe the discomfort isn't a warning sign. Maybe it's a growth signal. And this is exactly what Socrates understood, that most people still don't. He knew that discomfort is the price of intellectual freedom, and he chose freedom anyway. Now the question becomes, how do you build that kind of inner strength without destroying your life? The Socratic method as a weapon of freedom. So what did Socrates actually do that made him so powerful? He didn't try to dominate rooms. He didn't try to win arguments. He asked questions, relentless, calm, surgical questions. And that's what made him dangerous. The method was simple, but psychologically devastating. When someone made a bold claim, he wouldn't attack it. He would ask, "What do you mean by that?" They'd answer. Then he'd ask, "How do you know that's true?" They'd explain. Then he'd ask, "Is that always true, or are there exceptions?" Slowly, gently, the illusion of certainty would collapse. And here's the genius of it. He wasn't humiliating them. He was exposing weak foundations. Now apply that to yourself. When you feel pressured to conform, pause and ask, what do I actually believe here? Why do I believe it? Did I arrive at this conclusion through thinking or through absorption? Who taught me this? What if the opposite were true? You see, most of what you call your opinions are inherited from parents, from culture, from media, from your social circle. And the moment you question them, something uncomfortable happens. You begin separating yourself from the crowd. That separation feels lonely at first, but it also feels powerful, because clarity replaces confusion. When you know exactly what you believe and why, you don't need to shout. You don't need to dominate. You don't need to convince everyone. You simply stand firm. That's real confidence. Not loud, not aggressive, not rebellious for attention. Grounded. You don't need to be loud to be different. You need to be internally aligned. And here's something crucial. Being different doesn't mean being oppositional. It means being intentional. You're not disagreeing to provoke. You're thinking to understand. And when you operate from understanding instead of insecurity, something shifts. Even if people reject your ideas, they feel your stability. And stability is intimidating in a world addicted to approval. But there's something most people don't talk about. What happens if you don't do this? What happens if you keep choosing comfort over truth? Let's talk about the cost of conformity. Let's be honest. Conformity feels safe in the short term. You avoid conflict. You avoid awkwardness. You avoid judgment. You stay liked. You stay included. You stay normal. But safety has a hidden cost. When you constantly shape yourself to fit expectations, you slowly disconnect from your own identity. And that disconnection doesn't explode overnight. It leaks quietly. You start feeling tired for no clear reason. You overthink small interactions. You replay conversations in your head. You feel anxious, even when nothing is wrong, because your inner self and your outer behavior are not aligned. And misalignment creates tension. Living for approval creates chronic anxiety. Because approval is unstable, it changes with trends. It changes with groups. It changes with moods. So you constantly adjust, constantly scan the room, constantly calculate, constantly perform. That's exhausting. Suppressed identity often turns into low-grade depression, not dramatic sadness, just a dull sense that something is missing, a feeling that you're capable of more, but stuck playing small. And then comes resentment. You start resenting the very people you're trying to please, not because they demanded you shrink, but because you chose to. And deep down you know it. People-pleasing slowly erodes self-respect. And without self-respect, confidence becomes fake. It becomes performance. Now imagine this pattern stretched over years, over decades. Imagine reaching 40, 50, 60 years old and realizing You lived according to what was acceptable, not according to what was true. That kind of regret is heavy, heavier than rejection, heavier than criticism, because rejection fades, but unlived potential lingers. So here's the real question. What kind of life are you building if you're afraid to be yourself? Comfortable? Maybe. Respected? Unlikely. Fulfilled? Almost never. Conformity protects you from short-term discomfort, but it quietly steals long-term meaning. And if you've made it this far in this video, something inside you already knows that. So now we shift from awareness to action. How do you start being different without destroying your relationships or your stability? Let's make this practical. How to start being different. Practical steps. So how do you actually do this? Not in theory, not in ancient Greece, in your real life. First, start small. You don't need a dramatic rebellion. You don't need to flip tables or announce a personality transformation. Start with small, controlled moments of honesty. Disagree respectfully in a conversation. Say, I see it differently. Share one opinion you'd normally hide. Your nervous system needs gradual exposure. Each time you survive mild disapproval, your brain updates. Authenticity did not kill me. That's how courage is built, not through intensity, but repetition. Second, build inner validation. Before seeking outer approval, ask yourself at the end of the day, did I act in alignment with what I believe? Did I speak truthfully? Did I stay grounded? If the answer is yes, that feeling becomes your reward. External approval becomes a bonus, not a requirement. Third, spend time alone, not scrolling, not distracting, not numbing, just thinking, journaling, questioning your own beliefs. Clarity grows in solitude. If you don't know yourself in silence, you'll lose yourself in noise. Fourth, accept that some people will leave. This is the part no one likes. When you stop performing, certain relationships shift. Some people are attached to the version of you that made them comfortable. When you evolve, that comfort disappears. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're changing. And growth always filters. Finally, choose long-term respect over short-term comfort. In any situation, ask, will I respect myself later for staying silent or for speaking honestly? That question alone can change your trajectory. Remember, Socrates didn't seek popularity. He sought truth. He wasn't trying to be different. He was trying to be aligned. Being different isn't rebellion. It's alignment. Alignment between your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And once you taste that alignment, going back to conformity feels unbearable. But before we end this, there's one final truth you need to hear. Let's bring this home. You think you're afraid of being different, but you're not. You're afraid of being judged. You're afraid of the pause after you speak, the silence, the raised eyebrow, the subtle shift in the room. You're afraid of being seen and not approved. But here's what no one tells you. Judgment fades. People move on. They get distracted. They find someone else to talk about. But regret doesn't fade. Regret grows. It grows every time you silence your truth, every time you shrink your personality, every time you betray yourself to stay comfortable. And one day, if you're not careful, you'll wake up and realize you built a life that feels acceptable, but not authentic. If Socrates were alive today, he wouldn't tell you to rebel. He wouldn't tell you to argue with everyone. He wouldn't tell you to burn bridges. He would ask you one question. Are you living someone else's life? Pause and really sit with that. Are your goals yours? Are your opinions yours? Are your fears yours? Or are they inherited, absorbed, unquestioned? Because the greatest prison isn't society. It's the version of you that never speaks. The version that edits itself, that calculates every sentence, that trades truth for approval. And the moment you decide to question your own conformity, The moment you choose alignment over acceptance, you step into a different kind of power. Not loud power, not performative power, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need permission, the kind that doesn't panic in silence, the kind that can stand alone and remain whole. So the next time you feel that pressure in your chest, that urge to shrink, that instinct to stay quiet, ask yourself, am I protecting my belonging, or am I abandoning myself? And remember, history rarely remembers those who fit in. It remembers those who stood firm. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that choice, it starts with you.